afternoon, and welcome to our TV show featuring documentaries revealing the realities behind myths using research and scholarship. I'm your host, Ergün Kırlıkovalı, and I will be with you every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're welcome to send me your feedback at myth&realities.com. Arnold Joseph Toynbee was a British historian born in London in 1889. He attended Balliol College of Oxford University. In 1915, the 26-year-old historian began working for the intelligence department of the British Foreign Office. What he did during 1915-1916 period is the main focus of today's discussion. Before the World War I, there were numerous overlapping departments in Britain coordinating public information and censorship, such as the Admiralty, War Office, Press Committee, British Board of Film Censors, the National War Aims Committee, the Neutral Press Committee, the Press Bureau, and the Propaganda Bureau. The latter was opened in 1914 and located in Wellington House. It was chaired by Charles Masterman, who recruited 25 well-known authors, young Arnold Toynbee among them. Toynbee served as a delegate to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 as a scholar of Byzantine at the University of London. In 1921, he became a correspondent for the Manchester Guardian at the height of the Greco-Turkish War. He went to Turkey and observed the Greek occupation of Western Anatolia. He wrote the book, The Western Question in Greece and Turkey. Based on that experience, he gave a remarkable insight in that book into the Greek atrocities perpetrated on Muslim inhabitants during the 3 years of British-induced Greek occupation from May 15, 1919 to September 9, 1922. Arnold Toynbee confessed on page 50 of that book that the blue book he compiled in 1916 on Armenian massacres was a piece of war propaganda. In 1925, he became the Director of Studies at Royal Institute of International Affairs in London. Author of numerous books and articles, Toynbee was considered a leading specialist on international affairs from until about 1950. Best known for his 12-volume A Study of History, 1934 to 1961, Toynbee was a widely read and discussed scholar in the 1940s and 1950s. He even made the cover of Time magazine in 1947. By the 1960s, however, his views had lost their luster among mainstream historians due to the widespread conviction that Toynbee favored myths, allegories, and religion over factual data. Married twice and produced 3 children, Toynbee died in 1975 at the age of 86. He had a long, productive, and somewhat glamorous life, although he was shunned by his peers towards the end of his life. During World War I, there were many reasons for propaganda. Among them are the need to vilify the enemies, to build the morale of the British people, to entice the neutral states like the United States, to join the war on the British side, to counter the poor image of Russia, an ally which was persecuting its Jews, among others. Britain especially feared that the strong Jewish influence in America would move the US to retaliate against the Russian treatment of Jews and harm eventually Britain's war effort. Then there was, of course, the case of Indian Muslims, whom the British government dreaded would join in a jihad, a holy war, against the Allies, alongside their Muslim brothers in the Ottoman Empire. If the Turks could be demonized, then the Indian Muslims could be shown that the Muslim Turks were really bad Muslims and not worth fighting for. Same went for the Arabs, hence the Lawrence of Arabia. The Turks were an easy target for denigrating, as propaganda material against them was plentiful already, although the sources were all dubious. One source of disinformation, for example, was the American missionaries, whom the Americans respected as heroes of a Christian nation. This affection for the missionaries could be used as a leverage to counter the anti-Allied feelings among the many Americans in 1915, especially among them Germans and the Irish. If the Turks could be portrayed as the murderers of Christians, the taint would also pass to the Germans, allies of the Turks. Indeed, this policy was to be greatly successful in swaying American public opinion to the British side. Propaganda was not a gentleman's game. Nevertheless, it was a wartime chore, a bad one, that had to be done. And some British gentlemen did it. Arnold Toynbee among them. They were so embarrassed of what their handiwork that they destroyed all the records of the propaganda office immediately after the war. The few remaining records have been found only by chance. Professor Justin McCarthy has found a number of them as he has gone through Foreign Office documents. They were copies that had been sent off to the other places, to other offices. Number of publications rose from 45 in 1914 to 469 in 1917, and the distribution from 2.5 million in 1915 to 7 million in 1916. We do not know how many stories were planted in what publications in America, or who was paid how much, but the sheer numbers tell much of the story. Arnold Toynbee wrote or edited several books defaming Turks. The Armenian Atrocities, The Murder of a Nation, was a catalog of alleged evils of the Turks. Toynbee mentioned therein that the Armenian refugees who had come to Alexandria were suffering terribly, starving and dying of disease, exposure, and starvation. This caused the British in Alexandria, who were taking care of these people, to protest. Toynbee had to apologize for this embellishment. In another book, The Murderous Tyranny of the Turks, Toynbee stated, the Turks were engaged in the maiming and warping of more gifted peoples. This, he wrote, had occurred throughout Turkish history. The racist qualities of such a statement are obvious. Then he wrote that Turks exterminated all Greeks and Slavs left in their territory after the Balkan Wars. In fact, just the opposite is true, where Balkan Muslims, mostly Turks, were massacred and others exiled by the hundreds of thousands. Toynbee kept lying and lying. He related that Turks had attacked the Arabs and were planning to exterminate all the Arabs, and that Turks had no civilization. The book was full of such slanders from cover to cover. Toynbee edited the third book called The Treatment of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, 1915-1916, known as the Blue Book because of the color of the cover. He did not bother to correct the false perception by the readers that Toynbee was this lone scholar writing on his own, not disclosing the fact that he was actually employed by Wellington House, the propaganda bureau. Lord Bryce, the presumed author of this book, was a long-standing friend of Armenians and a sworn enemy of Turks. He was the founder of an Anglo-Armenian association in 1893, the president of the British Academy, a former cabinet minister, and an admired figure in the United States. According to the official story, Bryce had been reading notes sent by Armenian friends when he had decided to write a book about it. He asked Toynbee, the young historian, if he would compile a book. They then presented the book idea to Lord Grey, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs then, who in turn presented it to the British Parliament. Parliament liked the idea and gave the go-ahead. In fact, that is not at all what happened. It's all lies. What really happened was the Propaganda Bureau asked Bryce for a propaganda volume and said, "We have this young man called Toynbee. He's pretty good. He can put it together for you." The book is 684 pages long, and there are so many errors and inconsistencies that our limited time here does not allow their consideration. The reliability of the sources in the book is extremely problematic. One source was letters submitted by Armenians, Armenian organizations, and Armenian newspapers like Ararat and Gotchnag. Another source was American missionaries. In order to understand why this is a problem, we have to examine the missionaries. The American Committee for Armenian and Syrian Relief was founded in November of 1915. According to the circular that went out, it was a non-sectarian organization, but every single member of the board except one was part of the American Protestant missionary establishment. They began their new mission to aid the Armenians with a pamphlet full of atrocity propaganda. The pamphlet told of rapes, enslavements, and the murders of nearly all able-bodied Armenian men above the age of 12. The missionaries were so out of touch with reality that they even suggested that the US government to take over Turkey as an American mandate. But luckily, the American Congress refused the crazy idea. The relief organization engaged in an 8-year policy of vilifying Turks from 1915 to 1923. But all changed in 1923 once the Turks had won, and the mission obviously would not survive in Turkey unless they got along with the Turks. Suddenly, Turks were being praised by missionaries. There was complete cooperation between the missionaries and the British Propaganda Bureau I mentioned earlier. Missionaries sent materials to Toynbee. In return, Wellington House gave the missionaries propaganda material to distribute. 3,000 copies of Toynbee's blue books were distributed in America by the missionary relief organizations. The US government forwarded missionary materials via government's internal distribution systems. The US government gave secret documents to the missionaries who extracted sections from them. These eventually made their way to Toynbee with the statement, "Under no circumstances reveal the source." The missionaries did not hesitate to lie, distort by selective omissions. For example, there were 2 major books written about the rebellion of the Armenians in the city of Van. V-A-N, Van. One by a missionary named Usher, another by a missionary named Knapp. The Knapp book was excerpted in the Bryce report. To the missionaries, no Turks or Kurds ever died in Van, except for 4 sentences in the 350-page book written by Usher, in which he stated that Armenians sometimes took revenge against the Muslims who deserved to die. The fact is that Armenians had slaughtered every Muslim man, woman, and child they caught in the city of Van. They rounded up the Kurds in surrounding villages and killed them all. Yet you read all the missionary literature that only people who died were Armenians. The missionary campaign was a great success, raising $116 million. Posters in public buildings, sermons in churches, door-to-door campaigns, pamphlets, press releases. It was the biggest and most successful campaign ever seen in America, thanks to the propaganda falsely slandering Turks. The missionary establishment leaders most involved in providing propaganda to Toynbee were James Barton and William Rockwell. Barton had been a missionary in Anatolia. He was a congregational minister and the head of ABCFM, which stands for the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, the largest of the American missionary groups. William Rockwell, a Presbyterian minister at Columbia Theological Seminary, was the chief propagandist of the American Committee. And of course, there was Bogos Nubar Pasha, the head of the Armenian national delegation. All these people, and there was a Swiss guy too, provided materials to Toynbee, read the manuscripts, suggested edits, and read the proofs. At one point, Nubar wrote to Toynbee concerning the document, "Drop the phrases that make Turks look good." And Toynbee did. The original sources of nearly all the documents were the missionaries and the Armenians. The Blue Book was a collection of letters, pamphlets, and articles with an introduction by Bryce. This introduction was a summary of Armenian history based on myths and legends, with a view towards denouncing the Turks. In the documents in the Blue Book, many of the sources were not identified. They were called ABCXF, or words were used such as a traveler or a foreign resident. Place names were also disguised. All this was because of the need to protect the sources, it was alleged. Toynbee and Wellington House claim they have been trying to protect the sources, but the real reason is that the truth behind their deception would have been exposed if they had not done so. Instead, Bryce wrote, all possible sources were seen, and the respondents do not know each other. This was an outright lie. Some of the authors were missionaries who had compared notes before they wrote. In his letters, Toynbee remarked how similar the accounts seemed. He found that the authors had read other pieces and spoken to other authors before writing. Yet the Blue Book stated that because the accounts were completely independent, the similarity of their stories proved that they were true. What a shameful lie built on a blatant misrepresentation. Unless one knows who those people were, their documents make the Armenian case. When you do know their identities, though, the picture completely changes. Years ago, in the Public Records Office, Professor McCarthy found a small booklet that was printed for private circulation within the Foreign Office, which identifies the authors who contributed to the book. A smoking gun. This information was corroborated by Toynbee's papers, which are now available in the Public Record Office. The claim that the authors did not know each other was more than disingenuous, since sometimes they were the same people entered under different names. Case in question is this one, Zenides. 3 quotes from him were used. In the first 2 quotes, he was identified as a professor at the College of X. He actually was a professor at an American college in Merzifon, where all the students were Armenians, and he himself was a Greek. He also was the source of another completely separate statement in which he was identified as a traveler not of Armenian nationality. How smart. He was, according to the Blue Book, two different people, another of many such misrepresentations. The missionaries who relate hearsay were described only as American travelers. It appears that there were an awful lot of American tourists going around Anatolia through war-ravaged Anatolia during the First World War. In actual fact, they were all missionaries, or their wives, or their sisters. Some authors were listed only as an authoritative source, which included the Armenian Patriarch, hardly a nonpartisan, impartial source. The largest group of authors were American missionaries, 59 out of 150. The next came individual Armenians, 52. Many times, only the name of these Armenian contributors was known to Toynbee, not who they were or any information on their honesty, sincerity, or reliability. Many times, not even that was known, because they were identified only as an Armenian. Many of the contributors reported that very few reported what they saw. What is even more amazing is 7 documents were forwarded by the Gotchnag party, the sworn enemies of the Ottomans. This is like including 7 documents from Al-Qaeda in a book describing Israel, or 7 documents from KKK describing African Americans. That's the kind of shameless book Toynbee's Blue Book is. Gotchnag was the party of revolutionaries who were responsible for the rebellion in Van, the ones who had attempted to take the area and many other areas from the Turks and the Muslims, and those who persecuted the Muslims of the East. Documents were also forwarded by Armenian political representatives. Many of the authors were not known. Toynbee did not know who had actually written it. One source, known to Toynbee only as the wife of an American missionary, was a woman who had never left her mission station. She was reported as a refugee. Today, the books that I have described are still recommended to American school children and university students. They are still basic elements of school histories and advocacy by Armenian scholars. How incredible is that? By no means we have the products of World War I, British propaganda, disappeared. Indeed, the Blue Book and the Armenian atrocities have been reprinted and celebrated in a book signing in the House of Lords, no less, a few years ago. World War I propaganda from Wellington House and from the missionaries is routinely reprinted and quoted. World War I propaganda is accepted as true in the US Congress and the French Parliament. It appears in high circles of state along with other fabrications, such as that bogus Hitler quote. Very few have opposed the continued slanderous propaganda against the Turks. The lies that were told during wartime have had a half a century and more to incubate. Now they are the accepted wisdom. Everyone thinks they know what the Turks did. In fact, what they know is what the British propaganda ministry and the missionary propagandists told them 100+ years ago. The truth seekers have a duty to try to right this historic wrong. That is why I'm doing this. British Office for Wartime Propaganda will remain in infamy after 100+ years, as it propelled a bunch of hearsay, embellishments, fabrications, and fallacies into a full-scale genocide narrative desperately held onto by Armenians and their uncritical genocide scholar friends today. Britain officially apologized to Germany in 1926 for the wartime propaganda demonizing all Germans as barbarians who make soap out of Jews they kill. Such outrageous lies were bought lock, stock, and barrel in those dark days of World War I. The same apology, though, was withheld from Turkey, despite reminders and at least one official request from the Turkish parliament in 2005. The British wartime propaganda in the Blue Book is taken at face value today by Armenian falsifiers and Turk haters and their uncritical supporters in the circle of the so-called genocide scholars. What other academic crimes did Toynbee's Blue Book achieve? How did that body of wartime disinformation help create today's so-called genocide industry? Will the Armenians finally open their archives for the world to see? Will there be a joint historians committee to study those and other archives? Can there be a civilized dialogue to discuss shared pain and honest just memory? These are all great topics I plan to explore with you. Thank you for joining me. See you next week.